The galaxy had long forgotten humanity, and humanity had long since abandoned hope of ever being remembered. The Forsaken Army, once a proud and formidable force, now stood as a shadow of its former self. The war with the Vorkari had been long and merciless, leaving nothing but shattered fleets and broken dreams in its wake. Once their ships had sailed the stars like wolves among sheep, but now their fleet was a ragged collection of old vessels scavenged from the wreckage of past battles. General Marcus Drake stood on the bridge of the Phoenix, humanity's last remaining warship, staring out at the emptiness of space. The stars twinkled coldly, distant and uncaring. He could hear the echoes of the past in his mind. The sounds of gunfire, the cries of soldiers, the thrum of engines pushing their ships into the void. All those voices were silent now, lost to time, their sacrifices rendered meaningless in the face of their inevitable defeat. The Vorkari had already invaded dozens of human colonies, eradicating every trace of life in their path. Earth was next on the list. The Vorkari were relentless, their empire vast, and their thirst for conquest insatiable. But humanity was not without its will to fight, even in the face of overwhelming odds. They had built the Forsaken Army to be the last line of defense against annihilation. Unfortunately, that line was thin, too thin to be truly effective against the technological might of the Vorkari. "General, we've received another transmission," said Lieutenant Sarah Thorne, breaking his grim reverie. Her voice was steady, but Drake could hear the fatigue in it, the exhaustion that weighed heavily on everyone aboard. The Phoenix was not just a ship anymore. It was a lifeline, a fragile beacon in the dark, and they were barely holding on. Drake turned to face her, his expression hardened. "Patch it through." The screen flickered to life, revealing a starkly lit room where an unfamiliar officer sat in front of a command console. His face was etched with the same wariness that had taken root in Drake's own mind over the years. The officer's uniform marked him as part of a military force Drake had never seen before, a ragtag group of survivors from other worlds. "General Drake, this is Captain Elias Horn of the Last Resistance. We have critical intel." His words were rushed, urgent. "The Vorkari are constructing a weapon, one capable of wiping Earth off the map in one strike. We've intercepted communications confirming its completion in 3 days. You need to act now, or Earth is gone." The words hit Drake like a punch to the gut. A weapon that could destroy Earth. The Vorkari had always had weapons of mass destruction in their arsenal, but this was different. This was something that would ensure humanity's extinction, not just another failed attempt at a siege. "We're all but finished," Drake muttered under his breath. His hands clenched into fists. The Phoenix was all that remained of the Forsaken Army, and even that was on the verge of collapse. They had barely enough resources to get by, let alone launch a full-scale assault on a Vorkari stronghold. But the alternative was unthinkable. Captain Horn's voice broke through his thoughts. "We can't afford hesitation, General. We've lost everything. But this could be humanity's last chance. We need you to rally what's left of your fleet and strike at the heart of the Vorkari before they can use the weapon." A cold silence descended over the bridge as Drake processed the information. The weight of the decision was suffocating. The Phoenix was outgunned, outnumbered, and practically a relic at this point. He looked out into the endless void of space, seeing only blackness where once there had been stars. He thought of Earth, the cities, the people, the dreams that would be lost if they failed. "Send the coordinates," Drake said, his voice steady, but the decision hung heavy on his chest. "We'll need every ship we can scrounge together. It's time to end this." Thorne nodded, already typing commands into the console. "Aye, sir. Sending coordinates now." As the transmission ended, Drake felt a surge of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. The Forsaken Army had been written off, forgotten by the rest of the galaxy, but they would not go quietly into the dark. They would be the ones to make the final stand. They would not let humanity fall. The sound of footsteps echoed on the bridge as Sergeant Leela Moore approached. She had been with Drake since the beginning, a soldier forged in the fires of the war. Her face was a map of scars, both external and internal, but there was a fire in her eyes that matched his own. "General," she said, her voice low but determined, "we're not dead yet, are we?" Drake met her gaze, the weight of their mission hanging between them. "No, Sergeant, we're not dead yet." He turned back to the stars. "And we won't go down without a fight." As the Phoenix turned toward the Vorkari stronghold, the Forsaken army set their course for humanity's final battle, knowing that this would be their last chance. Their fate was sealed, but they would go down fighting, not as forgotten soldiers, but as the last hope of humanity. The Phoenix cut through the void of space, a lone ship drifting toward an uncertain fate. The crew, battered and worn from endless campaigns, moved like ghosts through the corridors, their expressions hollow, haunted by the weight of their mission. Despite the orders to prepare for battle, there was an unspoken question hanging in the air. Could they really pull this off? Could the Forsaken army, reduced to a few thousand survivors aboard a barely operational ship, stand up against the Vorkari and prevent Earth's destruction? General Drake knew that the answer was uncertain, but he refused to let that doubt take root. He stood on the bridge, his eyes scanning the vast, dark expanse of space. His fingers brushed against the weathered map of the galaxy pinned to the wall. The coordinates to the Vorkari stronghold blinked on the monitor ahead of him. Earth's fate lay within striking distance, too close to ignore, but still light years away from being within reach. "General," Lieutenant Thorne's voice broke the silence, pulling Drake from his thoughts. "We've received the transmission from the last resistance. They've outlined the Vorkari stronghold's defenses. It won't be easy." Drake turned, meeting her eyes. He could see the strain in her face. Thorne had been the heart of the Phoenix at operations for years, a brilliant strategist who had seen more death and destruction than any soldier should. But now, even she seemed unsure. "Show me," he ordered. Thorne stepped forward, activating a holographic display. The blue light flickered to life, revealing the sprawling layout of the Vorkari stronghold, a fortress carved into the heart of a barren planet. It was a brutal and impregnable structure, surrounded by a cloud of Vorkari warships and automated defenses. The weapon that could destroy Earth was housed in the deepest, most secure section of the stronghold, guarded by elite Vorkari forces that had been bred for one purpose: to crush humanity. "The Vorkari don't do things halfway," Thorne continued. "They've got a fleet of more than 100 ships in orbit, all equipped with advanced weapons and shields. And these aren't just any ships. Each one is crewed by the Vorkari's elite warriors, the Xernok, genetically modified soldiers with enhanced strength, speed, and resilience. If we want to make it past them, we'll need more than just guts and willpower." Drake felt the weight of her words. The Vorkari were not just an enemy. They were an overwhelming force, a species that had never known defeat. They fought with a cold precision that made even the most battle-hardened warriors tremble. But humanity was desperate, and desperation, Drake knew, was a powerful motivator. "We may be outmatched," Drake said, his voice grim, "but we've got something they don't. We have nothing left to lose. Every ship in our fleet might be patched together from the scraps of others, but we know how to fight dirty. We know how to survive against all odds. And we have each other." The room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. The crew of the Phoenix had seen their share of battles, each more brutal than the last. They were a band of brothers and sisters, each with their own scars, physical and emotional. They were all that remained of humanity's last line of defense, and now it was up to them to strike the final blow. "We'll need to split into 2 groups," Drake continued, the plan beginning to take shape in his mind. "We'll hit them from multiple angles. One group will focus on the outer defenses, drawing their attention and creating a diversion. The other group will penetrate the stronghold and destroy the weapon. We'll need to move fast. If we wait too long, The Vorkari will launch their counterattack, and we won't make it out alive. Sergeant Leela Moore, who had been quietly observing, spoke up. And what about the civilians? The last resistance said there were human survivors inside the stronghold. We can't leave them to die. Drake nodded somberly. We won't. If we can, we'll free them. But our first priority is the weapon. Without it, the Vorkari lose their advantage. Everything else is secondary. Moore's eyes flickered with doubt, but she didn't argue. She understood the harsh truth. The weapon had to be destroyed before humanity could have any hope of surviving. The rest could wait. As the meeting broke up, the crew dispersed, each of them quietly preparing for the coming battle. Moore, however, lingered by the doorway, her face drawn with the weight of responsibility. She had seen too many good men and women die on this war, and the thought of another battle, another sacrifice, left a cold pit in her stomach. Drake approached her, sensing her hesitation. You're thinking about it, aren't you? He said softly. Moore nodded, her eyes distant. How do we keep fighting when we know this could be the end? We've lost so much already. What happens if we fail? Drake's gaze softened, but his resolve didn't waver. Then we fail, but we die fighting. And that means something. That's all we have left. If we go down on our terms. Moore let out a long breath, her shoulders slumping slightly. She knew he was right. The war had taken so much from them, but if they didn't fight now, there would be nothing left to fight for. All right, she said, a flicker of fire returning to her eyes. Let's make it count. As the Phoenix made its final approach to the Vorkari stronghold, the soldiers prepared for what could be their last fight. The hope that had once seemed lost now burned brighter than ever. They may have been fractured, but they were still human, and they would not go quietly into the night. Their final battle had begun. The Phoenix descended toward the Vorkari stronghold, a planet devoid of life, but filled with destruction. In its orbit hung the cold reminder of their mission, a weapon capable of erasing Earth from existence, and with it, humanity's final hope. Drake stood at the command station, his gaze fixed on the dark horizon of the planet below. This was it, the moment they either rose or fell as a species. General, we've entered their defense perimeter, Lieutenant Thorne reported, her voice steady despite the tension hanging in the air. The Vorkari are aware of our presence. They've launched a scout fleet. ETA, 15 minutes. Drake nodded, though the chill in his chest never faded. The battle was about to begin. Prepare the diversion team. Sergeant Moore, take your squad and engage their scouts. We need to buy the main force some time. Sergeant Moore, already clad in her combat gear, saluted without hesitation. Understood, sir. Her expression was hardened, as if she had already reconciled with the grim reality of what they faced. She knew the stakes all too well. As Moore's squad moved toward the hangar bay, Drake turned to the rest of the crew. The Phoenix was barely holding together, its hull pocked with craters from previous engagements. The engines hummed erratically, but they still had enough firepower to make the Vorkari notice. It would have to be enough. All hands, prepare for combat, Drake called out over the intercom. This is our fight. We either win or die trying. But we will not go quietly. We will not give up. The crew echoed their agreement with a rallying cheer, the energy lifting as it spread throughout the ship. Despite the fear, despite the knowledge that they were outgunned, they were still humanity's last stand. They were still here, still fighting. That had to mean something. Moore's team exited the Phoenix and launched toward the Vorkari scouts, sleek, menacing ships that sliced through the blackness with unnatural speed. Moore gripped the controls of her fighter, her pulse steady, her mind laser-focused. Stay sharp, everyone, she commanded over the comms. We're just a distraction. We need to keep their eyes on us and off the main fleet. No heroics. Her squad acknowledged, and the dogfight began in earnest. Vorkari ships swarmed them like a hive of angry insects, The airspace crackled with laser fire as Moore's squad weaved and dodged, their ships narrowly avoiding Vorkari energy blasts. The Phoenix's main fleet, led by Drake, had begun its assault, firing long-range weapons to keep the enemy at bay. Moore's squad broke formation as a Vorkari ship fired directly at her. The energy blast hit her wing, sending her fighter spiraling. She slammed her fist into the control panel, cursing under her breath. "Not today," she muttered, forcing the fighter back under control. She swung her craft around, lining up the Vorkari ship in her sights, and fired. The ship disintegrated in a burst of flame. Despite the success, the Vorkari were relentless. Their ships adapted quickly, shifting tactics as they honed in on the human force. "We need to fall back," Moore ordered. "We've bought them enough time. Fall back to the main fleet." Reluctantly, Moore's squad pulled back toward the Phoenix, leaving the Vorkari to pursue them. As they regrouped, the Phoenix fleet closed in on the stronghold. Drake, watching the skirmish from his station, knew they had gained only a fleeting advantage. The true challenge lay ahead. "Captain, status on the weapon's location?" Drake asked, his voice tight with urgency. Thorne tapped a few commands into her console. "We've pinpointed the weapon's control center. It's deep in the heart of the stronghold, shielded by multiple layers of security. We'll need to infiltrate from the surface and make our way through their main complex to get there." Drake's mind raced. "It's going to be a suicide mission. We're fighting through an army to get to a weapon that could wipe us all out in a matter of seconds. But we don't have a choice. We take it down, or we're all gone." "We're ready, sir," Thorne replied, her eyes locked on the tactical map. "All ships are in position. We'll go in hard, hit them fast, and move out before they can regroup. Time's running out." Drake turned to the communications officer. "Send word to the soldiers. Everyone is going to have to give everything they've got. No second chances." As the final assault began, the Phoenix led the charge, its weapons firing in synchronized bursts. The fleet flanked the Vorkari stronghold, unleashing a hailstorm of fire that shook the very foundations of the fortress. But the Vorkari were not easily defeated. Their retaliatory strikes were swift, almost calculated in their execution, making it clear that they had no intention of going down without taking the humans with them. On the surface of the planet, Moore's squad made their way to the stronghold's entrance. They fought their way through hordes of Vorkari soldiers, each one more vicious than the last. They pushed forward, knowing every step brought them closer to the heart of the enemy's operation. "Keep moving," Moore shouted, slamming the butt of her rifle into the skull of a Vorkari soldier. "We don't stop until that weapon is destroyed." Every hallway, every corridor, was a battleground. The Vorkari, relentless in their defense, came at them from all sides, forcing Moore and her squad to fight tooth and nail for every inch of ground they gained. But as they advanced, they could feel the weight of their mission growing heavier. With every step, the walls seemed to close in, the Vorkari forces intensifying their counterattacks. Time was running out. But for Moore's team and the Forsaken army, retreat was never an option. They were past the point of no return. "Stay focused," Moore barked. "We're almost there." And they were. The oppressive air of the Vorkari stronghold seemed to thicken with every step. Sergeant Moore's squad advanced through the maze of metallic corridors, their boots heavy on the cold floor, their weapons raised in constant readiness. The flashing lights of distant explosions painted the walls in hues of red and orange, signaling that the battle outside was only growing fiercer. But they were beyond that now. The real battle was inside, in the heart of the Vorkari fortress, where the weapon that could obliterate Earth lay hidden. Moore's breath came in short, controlled bursts, her mind focused entirely on the task at hand. The squad had already fought their way through a dozen Vorkari soldiers, but the deeper they went, the more heavily guarded the passages became. The enemy was adapting to their presence, tightening security and deploying more advanced units. The closer they got to the weapon, the harder it would be to push through. "We're getting close," Moore said, her voice low but firm, as she peered around the corner. "Weapons ready. We'll breach this next door in 30 seconds. No turning back." Her team nodded in unison, their faces a mix of determination and grim acceptance. They had all known this could be their final mission, but none of them had ever imagined it would come down to this, a last desperate charge into the heart of the enemy's empire. The door at the end of the corridor was a massive bulkhead, reinforced and shielded by a combination of Vorkari technology and military engineering. It was meant to withstand even the most powerful assault. But Moore wasn't concerned about the door. She had something else in mind. Sergeant Corporal Mason, the team's tech specialist, spoke up, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "I'm picking up a spike in their sensor grid. They're onto us. We've got minutes before they deploy heavy reinforcements." Moore swore under her breath. "We don't have minutes. We breach now, or it's over. Get that door open." Mason was already at work, his fingers flying over the console built into his armor's forearm. The door was sealed with multiple layers of encryption, but Mason's skills with Vorkari technology had kept them one step ahead so far. Sparks flew from his console as he bypassed the last line of security. With a hiss, the bulkhead creaked open, revealing a wide, empty chamber beyond. "Move," Moore barked. The squad poured into the room, weapons raised, scanning for any signs of movement. The air was thick with the hum of unseen machinery, the walls lined with strange alien symbols that had no meaning to them, only to the Vorkari. At the far side of the chamber, a large structure stood, its silhouette shrouded in shadows. The weapon. Moore's eyes locked onto it immediately, recognizing the shape of the Vorkari's most dangerous invention. It looked like a massive cannon, its core glowing with a faint, pulsating light. "That's it," Moore muttered, her heart pounding. "That's the damn thing that's going to destroy Earth." "Not if we have anything to say about it," Corporal Jackson, the squad's heavy weapons expert, responded with a grim smile. He lifted a grenade launcher, ready to take out the weapon's core. But as they moved forward, the door behind them slammed shut with a thunderous crash. The lights flickered, and a sharp mechanical voice echoed through the chamber. "You think you can stop us?" it said, the tone cold and mocking. "You are nothing but insects to be crushed beneath our boot." Moore's pulse quickened as she glanced toward the door. It had been too easy. The Vorkari had lured them in. A soft chuckle rumbled from the depths of the chamber. She knew that voice. A figure emerged from the shadows at the far end of the room. Tall, hulking, and clad in black armor. His eyes gleamed with a predatory light as he stepped forward. His every movement calculated, his every step full of purpose. Moore recognized him instantly. "Commander Karak," she spat. "I should have known." Karak was the Vorkari's most feared general, the one who had orchestrated the fall of humanity's colonies, and now, it seemed, he had come to finish the job. His reputation as a tactician was legendary, and he had been the one who led the brutal assault on Earth's outer defenses. Moore had seen his cruelty firsthand. Karak's mechanical voice hummed again, this time with a hint of amusement. "You think you can defeat me, human? You are already dead. I only came to watch the final moments of your species." Moore's fingers tightened around her rifle, but she didn't take her eyes off him. "I've killed better men than you," she said, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her. "And I'll kill you too." "Such fire," Karak responded, taking another step forward. "But fire is fleeting. You cannot defeat what is already inevitable." Before Moore could respond, the ground shook beneath them. The walls around them began to tremble as the weapon powered up, a low, humming vibration filling the room. The core of the cannon began to glow brighter, its energy escalating. "Now or never," Moore shouted, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We destroy the weapon, or we die here." Jackson fired his grenade launcher at the base of the weapon, the explosion rocking the chamber, but the weapon's shield held firm. Karak let out a roar of anger, stepping aside as his elite guards, tall, muscular warriors, charged forward to engage Moore's squad. "We need to move now," Moore ordered, signaling her team to fall back. They had no choice. The weapon was too heavily shielded, and they were running out of time. The reinforcements were closing in fast, and with Karek bearing down on them, the odds of survival were rapidly dwindling. The fight was only just beginning, and Moore knew they would have to give everything they had if they were going to stop the Valkyrie and save humanity. But the clock was ticking, and every moment spent here was another step closer to extinction. The true test of their resolve had only begun. The air in the chamber was thick with the sound of battle, echoing off the cold metal walls. Moore's squad was pinned down, forced to retreat toward the far side of the room as Karek's elite guards advanced. The roar of weapons, the hum of energy shields, and the crackling of explosions filled the space, but Moore's focus remained on the weapon. The time for hesitation had passed. Earth's fate rested in their hands. "Keep your heads down," Moore barked, her rifle snapping upward as she fired into the advancing line of Valkyrie warriors. The heavy bolts from her weapon slammed into their shields, but the impact only slowed them for a split second. Her squad was surrounded on three sides now, but they had no choice but to keep fighting. "Corporal Jackson, get another shot at that weapon," Moore ordered, her eyes locked on the weapon's core. It was still glowing brighter by the second, its pulsing energy growing ever more dangerous. They didn't have much time left. Jackson nodded, slinging his grenade launcher onto his back and pulling a compact shoulder-mounted rocket launcher from his pack. He fired, sending a rocket streaking through the air toward the Valkyrie cannon. The explosion was deafening, but when the smoke cleared, the weapon was still intact, its shield flickering but holding strong. "Damn it," Jackson swore. "We need to disable the shield first. It's the only way we're going to crack that thing." Karek's voice came again, cold and mocking. "You think you can defeat me? You are insects, scrambling in the dark. You have no idea what you're up against." The Valkyrie general's presence in the room felt like a crushing weight. His guards continued to press in, cutting off their avenues of retreat. Moore felt the pressure of the moment closing in on them, but she wouldn't let it crush her. Not yet. "Focus on the shield generators," Moore ordered. "Mason, get to the tech panel and override the power. We got one shot at this, and we need to take it now." Mason nodded, moving quickly, his fingers flying over the controls embedded in his suit. He crouched behind a stack of debris, his eyes scanning for the right access point. His fingers hesitated for just a second as he found the signal he was looking for, a weak point in the Valkyrie system. If he could patch into it, the weapon's shield would fall. The Valkyrie guards closed in, but Moore and her squad held them off with precise, coordinated fire. Mason's face was tense, sweat beading on his brow as the seconds ticked away. If he failed to hack the shield in time, everything they had done would be for nothing. "They're almost on us," Corporal Mason called, his voice tight with anxiety. "I can't get through their firewall." Karek's laughter rang through the chamber again, a cruel sound that reverberated off the walls. "It's too late for you. It's always too late." But Moore wasn't ready to give up. Not now. Not when Earth was hanging on the line. "We don't have time for this," Moore shouted, grabbing a grenade from her belt and tossing it at a nearby cluster of Valkyrie warriors. The explosion was small but effective, sending them scattering for cover. The distraction was enough for Mason to complete the hack, and with a final press of his fingers, the energy shield flickered and then collapsed. "Shields down," Mason yelled, his voice a mixture of relief and adrenaline. "We've got our shot." "Now, Jackson," Moore ordered, her voice a bark of command. She could see the rocket launcher still slung across Jackson's back, his face set in a grim line of determination. Jackson didn't hesitate. He aimed the launcher directly at the now vulnerable core of the Valkyrie weapon. The rocket streaked through the air, slamming into the exposed power source with a deafening explosion. The chamber seemed to hold its breath as the force of the blast rippled through the room. For a moment, Moore thought they had succeeded. But the silence was short-lived. Karek's voice rang out again, laced with venom. You think you've won, human. You have no idea what's at stake. You cannot destroy what you cannot understand. Moore's blood ran cold. The weapon might have been damaged, but something far worse was unfolding. She had seen the way Karek moved, calm, controlled, calculating. There was more to this weapon than they had anticipated, more than they had prepared for. She glanced at the wreckage of the Vorkari cannon, but the structure was still standing, its core still glowing ominously, albeit more erratically. It was clear now. The weapon wasn't a simple bomb or energy cannon. It was a device tied into something far larger, something far more dangerous. We need to shut it down, Moore said, her voice tense. We've got to find the control room. But before they could make another move, Karek advanced, the Vorkari general's towering form emerging from the smoke, unharmed. He was faster than they had anticipated, stronger than any of them had prepared for. You've made a mistake, Karek said with a cold, almost regretful tone. But I'll allow you to see the true power of the Vorkari. You will all witness the end of your pitiful species firsthand. With a flick of his wrist, Karek summoned reinforcements from the shadows, more elite soldiers, more monstrous creatures, all charged with the single task of eradicating Moore and her squad. Moore raised her rifle, her hand steady despite the overwhelming odds. She knew there was no turning back now. The fight for Earth's survival had entered its final stage, and they would have to fight with everything they had left. We take him down, Moore said, her voice unwavering. Now. The squad rallied around her, weapons raised, ready to charge into the heart of the storm. It was now or never. Their final chance to stop Karek, to destroy the Vorkari weapon, to save Earth. The battle had reached its climax, and there was no room for failure. The battle had devolved into chaos. The air crackled with the sounds of gunfire and explosions as Moore's squad fought to hold their ground. The Vorkari reinforcements, monstrous, heavily armored warriors, advanced like an unstoppable tide, pushing Moore and her team back step by step. The Vorkari General Karek stood at the center of it all, an imposing figure that radiated an almost unnatural calm amid the violence. Moore's eyes never left Karek. The general's cold, calculating demeanor sent a chill down her spine. He was no ordinary enemy. He was a leader, a strategist, and an embodiment of the Vorkari's relentless drive to dominate and destroy. But Moore had seen enough in her life to know that even the most terrifying of enemies could be defeated if you had the will to do so. Fall back to the control room, Moore shouted to her squad. They had to move quickly. Time was running out. If they didn't shut down the weapon now, Earth would be lost, and all of their efforts would have been in vain. The squad, battered but resolute, retreated toward the far side of the room, firing relentlessly at the advancing Vorkari soldiers. Mason was in the rear, his tech pack buzzing as he attempted to interface with any remaining systems to disrupt the Vorkari's reinforcements. Jackson was at the front, his grenade launcher unleashing bursts of explosive force that cleared their path, but the Vorkari were relentless. They kept coming, their numbers overwhelming. Keep pushing forward, Moore urged, her voice sharp with urgency. We don't stop until we've taken down that control room. But just as they reached the door to the control room, a massive explosion shook the chamber. Moore's world tilted as the ground trembled beneath her feet. The ceiling cracked, sending debris raining down, and the lights flickered violently. For a split second, the whole world seemed to slow as Moore stumbled, disoriented by the blast. Sergeant, Jackson's voice cut through the chaos. He reached out, pulling her to her feet as the sounds of the battle intensified. We can't stay here. Through the dust and smoke, Moore spotted Karek again, his silhouette now bathed in the red glow of the weapon's core. The general had clearly anticipated their move, and he wasn't about to let them reach the control room. He moved with deadly precision, his heavy armor almost a blur as he advanced on them, a wave of Vorkari soldiers surging behind him. Moore didn't hesitate. She fired into the approaching line, her weapon crackling with energy. But the Valkyrie kept coming, unfazed. The squad was being pressed from all sides, the weight of the enemy closing in on them like an iron trap. "We need to take him out now," Moore shouted, her voice a mix of determination and urgency. The mission had become a race against time, and Karek was the final obstacle standing between them and their only hope of saving Earth. "On it," Jackson shouted in response, charging forward to meet Karek head-on. The heavy weapons specialist moved with surprising agility, his rocket launcher aimed directly at Karek's chest. But the Valkyrie general was quicker than anyone had expected. With a movement so swift it was almost impossible to track, Karek parried the incoming rocket with a burst of energy from his own gauntlet, redirecting the blast into the ceiling. The explosion sent debris raining down once again, but Karek barely flinched, his armor absorbing the shock with ease. "Impressive," Karek said, his voice a cruel whisper, but ultimately futile. He lunged toward Jackson, his blade flashing in the dim light as he aimed for the heavy weapons specialist's throat. Jackson barely managed to duck in time, but Karek's strike grazed his shoulder, sending him crashing to the ground. "No," Moore screamed, her voice raw with anger as she dove forward, firing into Karek's chest. But the Valkyrie general's shield held strong, the shots deflecting harmlessly off the impenetrable armor. Mason, with his back to the wall and his fingers flying over the interface of his tech gear, called out, "I've almost got it. One more second." Moore's heart raced. This was it. If Mason could override the control room's security systems, they could shut down the weapon, but they needed more time, and Karek wasn't about to give it to them. With a roar, Moore charged at the Valkyrie general, her rifle raised in a desperate attempt to distract him. Karek turned to face her, his expression one of cold amusement. He swiped at her with his blade, forcing Moore to leap back to avoid the deadly strike. The general's superior strength and reflexes were clear now. Every movement he made was a calculated strike meant to bring them to their knees. "Do you think you can defeat me, human?" Karek taunted. "I am the harbinger of your extinction." But Moore's eyes narrowed. "I've killed gods before," she muttered under her breath. "And you're nothing but a coward in a suit of armor." Her words seemed to hit their mark, and for just a moment, Karek hesitated. The smallest crack in his otherwise unwavering confidence appeared. Moore saw it, and without thinking, she dove forward, grabbing a grenade from her belt and tossing it at Karek's feet. The explosion was deafening. The shockwave sent Moore flying back, her body slamming into the control room wall. For a moment, everything was a blur of smoke and ringing in her ears. She struggled to regain her bearings, her vision swimming as the dust settled. When she opened her eyes, Karek was still standing, but he was slower now, disoriented by the blast. His armor was cracked, the force of the grenade doing more damage than Moore had hoped for. "Now, Mason," Moore shouted, the adrenaline coursing through her veins. She could feel the tide turning in their favor. The weapon was within reach, and Karek was no longer invincible. Mason, his face pale but determined, gave the final command. "I've got it," shutting it down. The humming of the weapon's core slowed, its glow fading as the system went dark. The silence that followed was deafening. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Moore allowed herself to exhale. The weapon was disabled. The Valkyrie had lost. But Karek, still standing and seething with fury, growled through gritted teeth, "This isn't over, human. The Valkyrie will never be defeated. You may have won today, but we will return." Moore's eyes narrowed. "We'll be ready." And with that, the last chapter of the battle for Earth was written. But Moore knew this fight, this war, was far from over. The room was still, save for the low hum of the remaining systems that had powered down after Mason's successful override. The weapon was disabled, the pulse of its deadly energy no longer threatening to annihilate Earth. But Moore didn't feel the rush of victory. Not yet. The battle was far from over, and the Valkyrie were not known for giving up easily. Karek stood in the midst of the wreckage, his armor battered but still functional. His eyes, cold and calculating, fixed on Moore with unrelenting focus. He had been wounded, yes, but that didn't mean he was out of the fight. His pride had been wounded more than anything, and the thought of defeat was a foreign concept to him. "You think this changes anything?" Karek's voice was a low growl. "The weapon is gone, but I am still here. You are nothing but a temporary setback. The Vorkari will reclaim what is rightfully ours, and you, human, will burn in the ashes of your own failure." Moore stood, rifle still in hand, her body sore from the fight, but her resolve stronger than ever. "You'll have to kill me first, Karek." Her words were cold, defiant, and sharp as a blade. She had seen the face of war countless times, and she knew that the true cost of this battle was yet to be paid. The weapon might have been deactivated, but Karek and his forces still had the potential to destroy everything. She couldn't let this moment slip away. Not now. "Jackson, Mason, get to the control room," Moore ordered, her voice steady despite the rising tension. "We need to ensure the weapon is permanently disabled and that nothing remains to threaten Earth." "On it," Jackson replied, pushing himself to his feet. His shoulder was still bleeding from the earlier attack, but he moved with determination, his weapon raised, and his eyes scanning the room for any sign of danger. Mason followed closely behind, his hands already working to secure the systems and make sure the Vorkari had no way of reviving the weapon. But Karek wasn't finished. With a snarl, he lunged forward, closing the distance between him and Moore in an instant. His gauntlet-powered blade slashed through the air, aiming directly for her heart. Moore sidestepped just in time, narrowly avoiding the strike, but she could feel the wind from the weapon as it passed dangerously close. Karek spun around, his movements faster than she anticipated. He aimed another deadly blow, this time aimed for her side. Moore dove to the ground, rolling to the side just in time to avoid the fatal strike, her heart pounding in her chest. She landed in a crouch, quickly rising, and aiming her rifle at the Vorkari general. "You're good, I'll give you that," Moore said, gritting her teeth. "But this ends today." Karek didn't respond immediately. Instead, he tilted his head, his voice cold but laced with a dark amusement. "You truly believe you can win? I have watched entire civilizations crumble before me. And you think your human strength can overcome the Vorkari?" "Strength isn't just about power," Moore retorted, her grip tightening on her rifle. "It's about perseverance, and right now, you've underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, survive, and fight back." With a roar, Karek charged again, his blade raised high, a vicious arc of energy trailing behind it. Moore fired, the bullets striking Karek's shield, but they barely made a dent. The Vorkari general was a force of nature, and the full weight of his fury was crashing down on her. But Moore wasn't alone. From behind, Jackson fired his grenade launcher, the explosive shell slamming into Karek's back. The blast staggered the general, sending him to his knees. For a moment, Moore thought they had done it, but Karek's shield flared back to life, and he rose to his feet with a snarl, seemingly unscathed. "Die, human," Karek hissed, and with a swift motion, he released a shockwave from his gauntlet, sending Moore flying backward. She slammed into the wall with bone-crushing force, the world around her spinning. Everything went black. When Moore opened her eyes again, she was lying on the cold metal floor, her head throbbing with pain. The sounds of battle still echoed in her ears, but it was quieter now, as though the fight was drawing to a close. She pushed herself up, groaning as she took in her surroundings. Karek was standing over her, his blade raised for the final blow. She could see the fire of victory in his eyes, but something in his posture had shifted. He was overconfident now, thinking the battle was already won. "Don't think for one second that you've already won," Moore spat, her voice hoarse but full of defiance. She could feel the weight of her team's survival pushing her forward, the knowledge that Earth still had a chance if she could just hold on for a little longer. Before Karek could strike, There was a loud whirring sound, and Mason's voice crackled over the comms. "Sergeant Moore, we've got it. The weapon is permanently offline. No more Vorkari surprises. You've done it." The realization hit Karek like a thunderclap. His posture faltered, and for a moment, Moore saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. You've destroyed it." Karek's voice trembled with fury. Moore slowly stood, her body aching from the impact of the blast, but the fire in her chest burned stronger than ever. "It's over, Karek. You've lost." With a primal scream of rage, Karek lunged toward her one last time. But this time, Moore was ready. She sidestepped, grabbing a combat knife from her belt and plunging it into the gap in Karek's armor. The blade slid in, and Karek let out a strangled gasp, his breath turning ragged. The Vorkari general staggered, his hand clutching at the wound as he collapsed to his knees. His eyes, once full of arrogance and pride, now reflected only disbelief. "This can't be," Karek rasped. "Yes, it can," Moore whispered, her voice steady, final. And it just was. With that, the once great general of the Vorkari Empire fell to the ground, defeated. The room fell silent. Moore's squad gathered around her, bruised but victorious. Earth had been saved. This time, they had fought, and they had won. The future was uncertain, but for now, humanity stood tall. The Forsaken Army had given everything, and they had secured the first true victory in the war for Earth's survival. The silence in the chamber was overwhelming. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the sound of battle had ceased. The heavy breathing of Moore's squad filled the air, their bodies bruised, battered, and worn. But amidst the exhaustion and the ruins of the Vorkari weapon, there was a sense of triumph. They had done it. Against all odds, humanity had survived. Earth had been saved. Moore stood over the fallen form of Karek, her heart still racing from the final moments of the fight. The Vorkari general, once an unstoppable force, now lay in a heap on the cold floor. The overwhelming arrogance in his eyes had been replaced by disbelief and defeat, a final testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He had underestimated them, and now the universe would know the price of that mistake. "Is it over?" Jackson asked, his voice gruff, yet filled with a relief that was palpable. He stood next to Moore, his weapon still gripped in his hand, his face smeared with dirt and blood. Moore nodded slowly, though the weight of the situation was not lost on her. "It's over for now, but we've made it clear that Earth isn't going down without a fight." Mason stepped forward, a few fingers still working the tech interface on his wrist, but the last of the Vorkari systems were locked down. "The weapon's completely offline," he confirmed, glancing at the destroyed remains of the weapon's core. "There's no way they can reactivate it. It's done." The squad took a collective breath, each of them exchanging looks of relief. The final push had been the hardest, but they had achieved the impossible. "Good work, everyone," Moore said, her voice steadier now. "We've bought Earth some time, but this isn't over. The Vorkari won't forget this. They'll come again." "You don't need to tell me twice," Jackson muttered, wiping the sweat and grime from his face. "If they think this was a fluke, they've got another thing coming." Moore turned toward the entrance, her thoughts momentarily drifting to the world outside this chamber. Earth, her home, was safe, for now. But she knew there was still so much more at stake. Karek might be dead, and the Vorkari weapon destroyed, but the war was far from won. This was merely one battle in a much larger conflict, and the enemy would regroup. But Moore was no stranger to the long game. Humanity had faced extinction before, and had never been more determined to survive. "Let's get back to base," Moore said, her voice carrying a weight of leadership that had carried her through every battle she'd fought. "We need to regroup, assess our losses, and prepare for whatever comes next. Earth isn't just going to hand us peace." They moved quickly, their steps purposeful despite the bruises and bloodshed. The long corridors of the Vorkari ship felt strangely quiet now, as though the once mighty warship had lost its will to fight. Moore felt a brief moment of relief, a fleeting thought that perhaps, just perhaps, the war was truly over, but she knew better. As they exited the ship, the stars above them felt different. The void had never seemed so vast, so empty, yet so full of possibilities. Earth had won this battle, but it had also sent a message to any who would dare threaten humanity's survival. The Forsaken army, battered and broken, had risen from the ashes, and they were not to be underestimated. Moore stood at the edge of the ship's landing platform, looking out over the desolate landscape below. The planet's surface, scorched from the battle but still standing, reflected the light of a distant sun. It was a new day, a new dawn for Earth, but the war wasn't over, and Moore could feel the weight of that reality settle in. "Do you think they'll come back?" Jackson asked, standing beside her, his voice quieter now, contemplative. "They will," Moore replied, "but we'll be ready for them." "And next time?" Mason spoke up from behind them, his tone filled with determination. "Next time, we go to them." Moore glanced over her shoulder at her squad, the people who had fought alongside her and would continue to stand by her no matter what. They had saved the planet, but they had also forged something far greater in the process, a bond that could not be broken, a unity that would carry them through whatever came next. "Next time," Moore said, her voice firm and resolute, "we finish this together." And as the Forsaken army made their way back to base, their mission far from complete, one thing was certain. Humanity had proven, once again, that no matter the odds, no matter the enemy, it would fight, it would endure, and it would survive. The war for Earth was far from over. But humanity was no longer the underdog. It was the force that would shape the future, and the Vorkari would learn, the hard way, that no empire, no matter how powerful, could stand against the will of humanity. The Forsaken army's final battle had ended, but the war for Earth was just beginning. And Moore, her squad, and the planet they fought for would stand firm in the face of whatever came next, because the human spirit could never be broken. Not now. Not ever.